Yes. Let's, okay, let's go with Laura.
Okay. Can you introduce our guest, please?
Yeah.
Hi, Sandy. Welcome to COIN. Again, welcome back. Maybe you could give, for those of us who don't know, tell us a little bit about yourself and the ACLU and its role in what's going on in Portland.
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Sandy Chung, Sure Pronouns. I'm the executive director of the ACLU of Oregon. The ACLU of Oregon is a nonprofit, nonpartisan organization. Our core mission is to defend and advance democracy, civil liberty, and civil rights. At this point, we have more than 48,000 members and donor supporters across the state of Oregon. So that's 1% of the state's population, which is amazing. And since election day last November, we've gained 14,000 more members. So obviously, Oregonians care very much about democracy. In the military deployment space, we've actually been planning for this since, to be honest, before the election. So we had actually started working with ACLU National last year to put together the biggest threats posed by the Trump administration to democracy, civil liberties, and civil rights. And we identified three areas that were specific to Oregon, although also happening across the country. But we had kind of identified as the highest priority work areas for us in Oregon. First, immigrant and refugee rights. And there we are part of the Oregon for All Coalition. Second, LGBTQ plus and abortion and reproductive health rights, so body and life autonomy rights. And there we are leading the Equal Rights for All constitutional change ballot measure coalition. And then third, we had identified this really big space of federal government abuse of power and aggression. And one of the main areas we were especially worried about was potential deployment of militarized federal officers, especially to Portland and or the military. And we had that worry because Portland has already experienced some of this stuff during 2020 when they sent in federal militarized federal officers who, among other things, went around downtown Portland in unmarked vans, not wearing identification with their faces covered, basically pulling people into the vans, kidnapping them. So some of what we've been seeing more of during the second Trump presidency, Portland had very specific experiences with during the first Trump presidency, including Trump really, I think, describing Portland in ways that were not accurate to the city, and vilifying Portland, including through news outlets like Fox. So we were really worried and had started this work planning. And so when Trump was elected to office, we had our risk analysis and started talking to many people, including elected leaders, who, especially at the city of Portland and the governor and AG's office level, took very seriously. So there's actually been a lot of planning for potential military deployment to Portland. There aren't necessarily easy solutions, but there's been a lot of work done to prepare. As well, we started working with other nonprofit partners, including labor unions, other justice organizations, progressive organizations, including Indivisible in Oregon, to put together a coalition to fight back against different types of fascist authoritarian overreach by the Trump administration, and also specifically started preparing for a military deployment. So today I do want to go through some of the recent timeline of things that have gone on related to Trump's efforts to try to deploy the military here. I was wondering if you could allow me to share my screen so I could share the PowerPoint.
Sure. Hang on a minute. Let me get you co-hosted. There you go.
And I won't be able to see your questions and do the PowerPoint at the same time, so I can accept questions at the end and answer your questions. So 1 second. Okay, so I just did a quick timeline to set out all of the things that have happened. Things have happened pretty quickly, but wanted to set it out in a way that's a little bit more organized. And we do see the threats to send the military to Oregon as part of other efforts by Trump and the federal government to be aggressive towards Oregon and other states. And so we're going to go a little bit back. It's not too far back. There have been other things that have happened, but specific to Oregon, we see that on Tuesday, September 16th, the U.S. Department of Justice filed a lawsuit against Oregon to get our private voter data that Oregon refused to hand over to the Trump administration when they demanded it. And then about, 10 days later on Friday, September 26th, the city of Portland actually started seeing signs that there was a potential increase in ICE agent deployment to Portland. So city leaders, along with a lot of the congressional delegation, held an emergency press actually event that Friday night, saying that they were seeing these signs of increase in ICE agents and letting the community know that this was really concerning and for the Portland community to be prepared. The next day, on Saturday, September 27th, Trump announced via Truth Social post that he had basically ordered Department of War Secretary Peter Hegseth to deploy troops to Portland, that he was authorizing full force to curb the protests outside the U.S. ICE office. The next day, immediately, the state of Oregon and the city of Portland filed a lawsuit against the Trump administration against the deployment of these 200 federalized Oregon National Guard members to Portland. They also requested a temporary restraining order, which basically means they said, it's going to take a while for the court to go through this processes, to have a trial and such and determine whether Trump is warranted in sending the military or not. But in the meantime, can the court order the troops to be kept out of Portland? And as you can see, the city of Portland and the state of Oregon filed our lawsuit pretty quickly. So again, just going to the preparations that elected leaders have been engaging in, especially under the leadership of Attorney General Dan Rayfield. So from the date that Trump said that he was ordering Hegseth to send federalized troops to Portland to the present day, there have been no troops actually sent to Portland. There were National Guard members in Oregon who were federalized, so put under the direction of the federal government, but they were put into administrative and training processes. So I just want to make that very clear because some people are under the impression that there have been troops in Portland, but that is not the case. That has not happened. So this past weekend, so on Friday, last Friday, there was a hearing before Federal District Court Judge Immergut, who was basically had this case, who was asked to issue the temporary restraining order. And so Judge Immergut heard both sides' arguments. And then the following day, on Saturday, Judge Immergut issued a temporary restraining order for 14 days, basically saying the president should not and could not, under the court's order, deploy federalized Oregon National Guard members to Portland. And here are some parts of the judge's order. I would actually encourage all of you to read through it. I can send you a list of things after my presentation. I was going to get together that list, but I didn't have time. But I'll definitely share it with someone like Teresa so you can have access to it. But I think the ruling is really powerful in its whole. But here are some really important parts of that ruling. One of the things that a lot of news media has kind of repeated is this line. The president's determination was simply untethered to the facts, right? That when they were saying there was all this chaos and stuff that merited the National Guard being sent in to the ICE building in Portland, that actually was not true and not supported by the facts. And then there's this other really beautiful part of this order, which I want to read to you. This country has a long-standing and foundational tradition of resistance to government overreach, especially in the form of military intrusion into civil affairs. This historical tradition boils down to a simple proposition. This is a nation of constitutional law, not martial law. Defendants, which is the federal government, have made a range of arguments that, if accepted, risk blurring the line between civil and military federal power to the detriment of this nation. So that same day on Saturday, October 4th, when Judge Immergut issued the temporary restraining order, the Trump administration immediately appealed it to the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals. And the Ninth Circuit will be hearing argument on this appeal this coming Thursday. That same day on Saturday, Trump actually ended up ordering 101 California National Guard members to Oregon in the dead of night. And we found out the following morning on Sunday. And his plan was to send a total of 300 California National Guard members who were still basically, he was arguing under federal power under a June order that he had issued related to National Guard deployment to Los Angeles. And when he issued this order deploying National Guard members in California to Los Angeles, he didn't actually specify a period of time or a geographic location. So he basically left that order really broad. And so here you can see the federal government finding loopholes, right? Because basically when Judge Emmergut issued her TRO, it specifically said Trump could not send in the Oregon National Guard members who had been federalized, right? It didn't mention National Guard members who were federalized from other states. So they were playing with technicalities, but definitely not within the spirit of the law. The next day, on Sunday, October 5th, Trump also ordered Texas National Guard members to both Chicago and Portland. And then that same day on Sunday, and so that's basically 2 days ago, California and Oregon united in the lawsuit to block Trump's deployment of the federalized California National Guard members. And the state of Oregon, the city of Portland, also asked the federal district court, so Judge Emmergut, for a second temporary restraining order, which basically said that Trump could not deploy any National Guard members from any states to Oregon. And so the judge held a hearing on Sunday evening. I was not able to listen to it, but I heard that she was pretty pissed off because Trump was basically, he was trying to find loopholes. He was being a punk, right? But he was not staying within the spirit of the judge's ruling. And so she said, okay, I'm going to issue the second temporary restraining order saying no National Guard member from any state can be sent to Oregon. And then as a final kind of part to the timeline today, Kristi Noem arrived in Portland, and I heard you having a discussion about that earlier. So what's been happening related to and outside the ICE office? Just to repeat, the ICE office in Portland is not a detention center. The closest detention center to Portland is the Tacoma, the Northwest Detention Center. The Portland office is a processing center. So when people are detained by ICE officers, they'll usually take them to that office to be processed. Not all the time, but often. And people with immigrants and refugees with required appointments have to go there. And for a lot of these folks, if they don't meet those appointment requirements, then there can be an order for them to be deported. I just wanted to mention there are some people in Portland who've started a campaign to get the city of Portland to pull the permit from the ICE building, and that's in process. And it appears that ICE very well may have violated the terms of their use of that building, including how long they can detain people, which under the city's rules for that office is no more than 12 hours. So very tricky situation. The city is handling that and has issued basically a notice to ICE saying, hey, you violated some of these rules for use of this office and kind of land use regulations. And so we're going to give you the opportunity to participate in this process. One thing that is tricky, though, is if the city were to pull this permit from the ICE office and this office did not exist, it would actually make it pretty hard for a lot of Oregonian immigrants and refugees, because the ones who have to make the appointments, what we're seeing ICE doing is shutting down their offices in other parts of the state. So some people in Southern Oregon have to travel 5 hours to get to Portland. And we've actually heard stories about some of these folks having to sleep outside because they don't have the funds to rent a hotel room, right? Or they may have trouble getting to Portland, but they also have to make the appointment. And so if we were to get rid of this office and people would have to go to the Tacoma Detention Center, we think that would be pretty harmful, right? So we don't agree. We would love ICE to not exist at all. And at the same time, as long as ICE exists across the country and in places like Washington as well, we're in a pretty tricky situation because immigrants and refugees, if they don't make their appointment, a lot of them will get deportation orders. So there is just this very difficult tension that we are all navigating. Some of the other things happening outside the ICE office, Perk Oregon, has a table outside the office oftentimes where volunteers will hand out Know Your Rights information to the immigrants and refugees going in for their appointments. They will also check in to make sure they come out. And if they don't come out, then assuming that they're being detained, they will try to make sure that immigration attorneys can go and represent these folks. So a host of things going on with our rapid response system. There also have been relatively small protests outside the ICE building. I would say they were larger earlier in the summer, but even then, when at the biggest, I would say it was a couple hundred at most. So certainly not large by Portland standards for protests. And recently, before Trump's Truth Social post, it had really dwindled down to maybe a couple dozen at nighttime. And they're just kind of a regular set of folks who've been camping near the ICE building to kind of keep vigil and watch. And so really hasn't been that much activity. But what we have seen regularly through the summer to the present, and there's been an increase, is regular violence by federal agents there towards protesters. So physical assault, flashbang grenades, pepper balls, pepper spray, tear gas arrests. And we're seeing the violence increasing a lot even in recent days. Recently, too, we're also seeing a lot of conservative or extremist influencers, so-called journalists, but like YouTubers, as well as figures who are January 6ers, Proud Boy members, and others who are increasingly coming to the ICE office. And we think to really instigate violence and try to also capture it to try to support the president's narrative that there's uncontrolled chaos and violence outside the ICE office. I don't know if you've seen this picture, but I think this is kind of becoming one of the iconic pictures from outside the Portland ICE office, which is this person dressed as a frog person standing up against federal agents. And another person who you might have not seen, whose photo I don't have here, there's a regular person dressed in a chicken suit who's outside the ICE building. And then I think even today, I think there was some video taken from on top of the ICE building while Kristi Noem was present. And you could see a handful of protesters in the distance with mostly journalists. And you kind of saw the chicken man standing there as well. This past weekend, there was a rally that was organized by a group, and they started at a park in Portland and walked over to the ICE office. And there was actually this elderly couple, 84 years old, and the husband is a veteran who had joined the march, saw it passing. It was like at 1 p.m. They were like, oh, this seems like a really peaceful march. And so they joined the march and walked over to the ICE building. And basically, they experienced physical violence from the protesters, including the wife actually getting a concussion. And here, one of the ending quotes I wanted to share with you from the wife who experienced the physical violence, and I think also the husband, who's a veteran, was pushed down. You can see that he uses a walker. She basically said, I never thought federal officers could behave this way. I really didn't. I always thought people must be provoking them or something, that they would never do this unprovoked. Obviously, I was wrong. So that is, I think, the presentation I wanted to share with you, but I'd be happy to accept any questions that folks may have.
Sandy, there were a few questions in the chat. There was a question maybe about process, that there is a 14-day temporary restraining order.
Mhm.
Maybe give an overview of what you would expect could
Yeah.
or happen after that.
With any case where the plaintiff, the person bringing the lawsuit, thinks they need an immediate order from the court to stop like significant harm from happening pending the lawsuit, you ask for a temporary restraining order, and TROs almost always are 14 days. And so the court, if they're going to issue that, they'll do that. And then what the parties do is then go in again and ask for a preliminary injunction, which is basically usually pending the process of the lawsuit. And so we have this temporary restraining order right now, and it's likely that the state of Oregon and the city of Portland will ask for a preliminary injunction, which is basically a long-term TRO. One of the questions that's come up is what happens if, for example, there's actually increased violence outside the ICE building, and more that, like, for example, if there's activity that happens there that is aligned with the president's narrative that there's uncontrolled chaos and violence, so that the military has to be sent in. And this is a thing. At any time, the U.S. government could go in and say, Your Honor, you said that the facts on the ground did not fit reality, right? It was untethered to the facts, but facts have changed, and now there are things going on outside the ICE office that merits the military coming in. So the court can always change their order at any point. So one of the things that we've been working on is trying to educate Portlanders and people in the protest community that we need to make sure that any protest is peaceful and nonviolent. That is really critical to us being able to maintain in court that the military here is unnecessary.
There's also a question about the what we call the guardrails against bringing military troops into American cities. Maybe you could speak about those and how they work. The Insurrection Act, the Posse Comitatus, and Titles 10 and 32.
Yeah. So basically, the Posse Comitatus is a federal law that says generally federal troops should not be used for internal law enforcement purposes, right? That they're really for defending the country against like in foreign wars or when there's invasion from outside the country. However, there are exceptions provided in Title 10 and the Insurrection Act that basically, if there's like rebellion or insurrection or those types of things going on internally, then the military can be deployed, right? Makes sense, generally. If you have a president who's actually following the law, including the spirit of the law, and upholding the rule of law. But what we would say right now is happening is Trump very much is deploying the military, not because there's any insurrection, because honestly, is there an insurrection happening in Portland? No, right? He's really doing it to police people in Portland and basically tell us that we have to be fearful of exercising our First Amendment rights. Peter.
Yeah, you're saying that it's the TRO has now gone to the Ninth Circuit, and judging from the history of the Ninth Circuit, it's likely that Oregon will prevail there, but then it will go to the Supreme Court, right? And then what?
Well, we're not sure about the Ninth Circuit because in California, after the National Guard was federalized and deployed to Los Angeles, the district court there did grant a TRO, stopping the deployment, but then the Ninth Circuit actually reversed it and said in these cases there has to be a large amount of deference given to the president. Judge Emmergut, in issuing the TRO in Oregon, used the standards set up by the Ninth Circuit when they reversed the TRO in California. So I think she was really careful to try to ensure that the TRO in Oregon would be upheld. But we just don't know actually what's going to happen at the Ninth Circuit. So I would say it's not clear how the Ninth Circuit is going to rule. We're all holding, crossing our fingers. And I think that's also the case with the Supreme Court too. We don't know. They continue to provide a lot of deference to a president when he's actually not acting like a president. And so that's real problematic. And this is, I would say, some of the practicalities and questions that come up if that happens. I think first, one of the questions that has come up is what happens if the Ninth Circuit affirms the TRO, but President Trump orders the National Guard in anyway? And that could happen. And that could happen and that could not happen. Because what we saw with him trying to send in the federalized National Guard from California, he was still staying within the parameters of the law, right? He wasn't going outside the courts. He was trying to find just a loophole and argue that he could use that loophole. And the judge shut it down. So it may be that President Trump just follows what the court says. If the president does not follow what the courts say, if the TRO is upheld by the Ninth Circuit and he still sends in the military or does an order, the question is the military going to obey that? I'm just not sure because ultimately who they have to follow is the Constitution. So I'm not sure if the president tries to get around a court order, what happens with the military? At this point, none of us know. But let's say that the military is deployed to Portland. My understanding is that Trump actually has to do a separate order for National Guard members who are deployed outside DC for them to be armed. And we're not aware of that type of order. So although the National Guard and military deployed to DC, they are armed, our understanding is they will not be armed in Portland. But the second thing is, even if you look at military deployment in LA or DC, it kind of fizzled out, right? It doesn't mean that their presence there wasn't harmful, but also like it generally fizzled out. And so even if the military ends up being deployed to Portland, what we need to do is still be really strategic and disciplined and nonviolent and peaceful in our protests. I think we also have to really strive to be respectful of service members who are there following orders, a lot of them not because they want to be, right? And also with the government shutdown, they're not being paid. So I think we just have to hold all of these things together and just let the situation fizzle out because, Donald Trump also gets pretty bored with things. So what they want is a lot of spectacle and us fighting back aggressively in a lot of ways. And the best way for us to resist and fight back in dissent is to actually just let things become pretty boring and non-eventful. But we also need to continue to peacefully and non-violently show that we dissent.
There's been a couple of comments in the chat. Is there some way to not fight back, but report or call ICE out on their use of tactics like pepper spray or attacking people and threatening to shoot them and that sort of thing?
Yeah, I think when you're seeing those articles and stuff, I think really share that with your communities. If you're on social media, share it with your social media communities. If you have newsletters, share it because a lot of people don't know. And I think this Oregonian article about this elderly couple who were assaulted on Saturday is a really great example because she says, most people think if law enforcement officers physically assault people, there must have been a good reason for it, right? And she's like, and I learned, no, there isn't. And so I think it's really sharing this with all of your community so people understand that right now Trump is putting together basically his own private military force who will brutalize people for the president and not for any, justified reason. So I think it's really important that people share that with their communities because, and it will be jarring for some people because we all want to believe that law enforcement, whether at the local or federal level, are here to protect us, not to harm us. But the facts on the ground, especially right now with federal agents in Portland and in Chicago, and elsewhere, that's not the case.
Okay. Thank you. Well, we had one last question. What does be chill mean and from whom does it come?
Oh, did I say be chill?
I didn't
Someone else
understand that.
did in the chat.
That was from the chat.
Yeah.
That was a response to a chat comment.
Oh, I'm sorry, Alan. Okay, I misunderstood that.
Okay.
Yeah, I think that's, thank you, Sandy, very
You're
much
welcome.
for that update.
Could I ask a quick question? It got skipped in the chat.
Hmm.
So my quick question is that Trump is now talking about insurrection and Insurrection Act. Does the ACLU and the DOJ have plans in place for how to respond to such a decision?
Yes. I think right now when he starts talking about the Insurrection Act, it's just a continuation of what he's been trying to label Portland as chaos and out of control. But now I think he's trying to, imply that also we are in active rebellion. So I think we just need to stay the course, right? We're really encouraging protesters to be peaceful and nonviolent, to be strategic. And honestly, when folks are going out to protest, like make sure you're in the state to do it. Make sure that you've had a good rest and you've eaten. And unfortunately, sometimes when I do go down to the ICE building, there are folks who haven't followed that advice. And, maybe they should have just stayed home for the day because, tempers definitely are flaring. But even when tempers flare, it's nothing more than, some very word fights, to be honest. And then people separating people and make sure that it doesn't become more. I think the other thing too is, there are some protesters who do like say swear at the ICE agents, right? We don't all do that. Some of us aren't going to do that. And like when you're swearing at ICE agents, that's not against the law. So
There's a question about, a couple of questions about assistance for people traveling or need to travel there.
yes.
And how can donations be made to help these people make their appointments?
So there's an organization that actually works on some of this stuff, but I know that they've been overwhelmed. So let me do this. Let me check with Perk about the best way to do this, and can get the information back to Therese to share with you. But I would say an organization that always needs financial help, and so if you can also ask all of your communities, is Perk. So perkoregon.org. But Perk is a mostly volunteer-run organization, and they are truly, we are all trying to support them. As much community support you can give them is great. The other thing I wanted to note is this coming Thursday, we are working with Senator Confam to put on a webinar by Hardy Merriman, who is an expert in authoritarianism. I'm going to share in the chat the registration link for all of you who may be interested. It is at 8 a.m. It's early, but that also means that a lot of people can probably make it. And so for those of you who haven't heard Hardy Merriman, I encourage you to attend the webinar and also share it with your communities, because a lot of us are not familiar with how authoritarian governments work. And I found the webinar very helpful. I've attended it probably like 6 times, but I wanted to encourage all of you to sign up. So I will share that in the chat.
Thank you. And thank you, Sandy, for joining us tonight with this update.
I think
We do have Representative Javadi here. And I know our hour is almost up, but I thought maybe we could introduce him and
definitely.
say a few words.
If he says hello, I can spotlight him, but I can't find
Okay.
him in the crowd. So say hi, Rep. Javadi.
Well, hello. I am so sorry. I am so tardy. This is embarrassing. I was in charge with warming up the dinner when the kids got home from football, and before I knew it, I had missed my 7 o'clock cue, and so here I am. But please forgive me. I'll take just a minute and answer any questions you might have. I know we'll run up at the end of time, but I'm happy to come back next time and be more punctual too.
Well, thank you. And I think we all understand about getting dinner ready for kids and that sort of thing. So appreciate you joining us. So why don't you introduce yourself to the group and tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. I'm Cyrus Javadi. I'm the state representative for House District 32. That's Clatsop County and Tillamook County up on the north coast of Oregon. Let's see, I'm also a dentist practicing when I'm not in session. I try to practice almost full time, but it's actually kind of like 3/4 time. See, my wife and I have a blended family. We have about 9 kids altogether. The oldest is 26. The youngest is just turned 9. And 4 of them are at college right now. 2 aren't, and then the others are somewhere between high school and elementary school. This will be my 2nd term, and looking at running for re-election as a Democrat. Just changed parties from being a Republican to a Democrat. Couldn't continue on in a party that I feel like is, working against the Constitution and all the values that I think are important to our country. And then also a party that doesn't want to get things done or solve problems like healthcare. And so after voting on the transportation bill to make sure it passed, and now so I was changing parties to work as part of a team that I think wants to make Oregon to continue to be a great place that it is now, and to protect those values for people. And so the last month's been a bit of a whirlwind, trying to get out and meet with everybody and answer questions and talk to them. And meantime, we're dealing with the fallout of HR1 and the impact that's going to have on the state budget, as well as the cuts we see coming to essential services like Medicaid and SNAP. And so that's been what's been consuming me. Alan, I have not forgotten about the critical energy infrastructure. It's on my list. I think I'm going to be actually doing a tour of that facility here in a couple of weeks too, and still plan to do an article about that. So just excited to be a part of the Democratic Party and what it stands for, and the good work they've been doing. And how's that for an introduction?
That'll do. Teresa, how do you want to continue, or I mean, we're at our 8 o'clock, so
How about
reschedule?
if we were to go another 10 minutes, if everybody wants to hang on, and we've got our rep here. Let's carry the conversation on for a few more
All right,
minutes.
that sounds good. I
Yeah.
have to tell you, I live in your district, as you probably know, and I didn't vote for you, of course, first time. So I'm very curious to hear what you have to say, and look forward to hearing from you as a Democrat. I will tell you, in your Substack, you gave one of the best pitches for the Democratic Party that I have ever heard, that they're willing to make unpopular votes to protect health care, to give local communities the tools they need to survive, that they act like a governing party, they're willing to debate ideas on the merits, defend constitutional principles, do the unglamorous, often thankless work of actually fixing things. So I think there's a lot of Democratic officials that would like to hear that and appreciate you saying that. But in the past, you voted, though, against rights or policies that are important to Democrats and progressive voters, like abortion access or gender affirming care. And you even signed a letter supporting Governor Abbott's harsh measures to stop people from crossing the southern border. How do you view those votes and actions now?
Well, first of all, you really summed up why the Democrat Party is so great perfectly, and I couldn't agree more. I think they are a party that will make tough choices and do tough things because it's the right thing to do for people. And it's often said that Democrats have a lot of heart, and I agree, and they have a lot of brains. So, and I think we see that play out in policy after policy. Now, about the tough votes I've taken in the past, I'd say I have learned a lot, and I could probably take the next 10 minutes just answering that question alone, but I'll say it like this. I think every one who decides to serve in politics should go into it with an open heart, open mind. Yes, you kind of go into it with some preconceived notions from your own life experience, maybe your professional experience. But I think where a lot of people run into trouble is when that worldview becomes the only view that they're willing to consider when we're talking about how to solve problems. And when I started into this, I didn't, I've of the 9 kids, there's 5 girls. And so let's just talk about reproductive rights at first. My kids all grew up in a family where nobody was abused, nobody had boyfriends that they were doing anything with, and so I kind of just came at it from how I was raised in my faith, that that there should be some limits on when people should or shouldn't have an abortion. And where I grew up in the Mormon faith, there were some exceptions like rape and incest, and that seemed to make sense. But the longer I served in the legislature, and for example, on House Bill 2002, which was in 2023, I was the first time when they brought that bill that I really dug into the policy behind it. I realized that sometimes, you were going to have situations where a 12 or a 13-year-old girl was going to get pregnant. And it wasn't going to be because, she had a boyfriend. It was going to a lot of times be because she was abused by someone who was older, like a parent or a brother or an uncle. And I was that was a really powerful lesson that I learned as I heard from families. And I was going to vote for the bill on the floor along with Charlie Conrad. The Speaker of the House, Dan Rayfield, came up to me and had said, "Hey, look, I know you're thinking about voting for this bill, but don't vote for this bill. This bill was designed to be, a bill that the Democrats would vote for. If you vote for it, you'll have to go back to your district." And at the time, I was, still a Republican, and this will be a bill that you would lose votes on. And I really struggled with that, but understood kind of at the time that, politics. Sometimes sometimes people make political choices because of that. Fast forward to 2024, when a bill about abortion came up again, and this time it was from the Republicans, and they wanted to put some limits on abortion. And when that bill landed on my desk, I again thought, well, this is a conversation worth having. But after I signed on to that bill as a sponsor, my email inbox exploded with people who were telling me their life story, families of women who had had abortions, doctors who all said, look, the problem is that just not every woman, there's not a one size fits all solution. Limits don't make sense. And as I listened to those stories, I became more and more convinced that they were right. Now, once I signed on to a bill, the bill wasn't going to go anywhere. There was no chance that bill was ever going to have a vote in the House. But those stories stuck with me. And as time's gone by, and as I've sat on that healthcare committee and talked with, like I said, with people from all over the state and honestly around the country, it's become clear to me that women, don't approach that point in their life um, without some heartbreak and some real struggle, and they need to have at that moment, whenever that happens to arrive, whatever choice all the choices in front of them without any pressure from anybody, especially from the government. And I don't feel like, and haven't for well over a year, felt like that politicians have any business in anyone's healthcare, especially reproductive rights. And so it's been a bit of a journey to come from a place where I was definitely felt like exceptions should be standard, especially as you look around the country and in Europe with limits, to a place now where I really feel like in Oregon, we're pretty unique. We've got a great set of laws that strongly protect women's rights. And I feel like that's the direction that Oregon should continue to go into.
Thank you for that. You said what's on your mind are the deep cuts in SNAP, Medicaid, and the ACA premium funding under the HR1 or Trump's big bill. Can you speak to how that will impact so many Oregon families, and how you as a now Democratic legislature will address that at the state level?
Yeah, I'm very concerned about the cuts. We are in Medicaid, in Oregon, we set aside money, quite a bit of money, in order to pay, have a robust Medicaid system. For every dollar Oregon invests, the federal government gives us $9. And because of that, we've been able to expand access to millions of Oregonians, 1.5 million Oregonians. What the federal government is doing is cutting that funding. First off, they're cutting the match so that we'll have less money coming into the pot from the federal government. Second, they're changing the requirements around who qualifies and adding some work requirements that will be a huge burden on people who are, at a time in their life and a phase of their life where they're, doing the very best they can. We estimate 300,000 Oregonians will lose coverage, Medicaid coverage. So we'll have less Oregonians to qualify. We will have less money to spend on services. So right now we're spending almost $30 billion directly on payments to hospitals and providers for care for Medicaid recipients. The same number of people will still need health care. Only 300,000 less will even be covered, and we'll have less money to pay for it. And so we'll see rates decrease to providers. Because rates will go down, there will be providers who will stop taking Medicaid. So there will be less choices for patient or for people who participate in the Oregon Health Plan. All that to be said, people will lose their benefits. Additionally, people who get plans from the exchange will see their rates go from $600 and about $670 a month for a family of two up to $2,700 a month overnight. Many of them won't be able to afford healthcare premiums on with that kind of an increase. They'll drop their insurance as well, and they won't qualify for Medicaid either. So we'll see hundreds of thousands of people uninsured who will still need medical care, who will then use the hospital systems, the ER rooms, which they won't be able to pay for because it's too expensive. Hospitals will have to write it off. And our hospital system in Oregon right now is on the edge of a cliff, especially our rural hospital systems. They are, we lost $300 million in the first quarter of 2025. The reason for the Medicaid expansion in the first place was to cover people who couldn't qualify for health insurance on the exchange, but were still using the hospital, and hospitals were bleeding money providing care to patients that they couldn't they couldn't collect. So we've just made the financial situation of every rural hospital and clinic in the state worse by these cuts. And so we have we're going to have to respond to these cuts. We can't just backfill the hole because $9 for every dollar Oregon puts in, we get 9 from the feds. We don't have the money to backfill the cuts that are coming from Medicaid. So our hospitals are going to be stretched. We will see hospitals like Coos Bay's hospital, who's already struggling, can struggle even more. We'll see hospitals like Seaside, Providence, cut more services, etc. So it's pretty dire. And I hate sounding dire, but right now, from my viewpoint, from the viewpoint of many of us in the legislature on the healthcare committees, we are burning the midnight oil trying to figure out how to respond to this in partnership with our hospitals and clinics around the state.
In your most recent Substack, it was titled "How to Make Compassion Sound Naive and Cruelty Sound Responsible," which is a great title. You lay out why the GOP's big bill is a bomb lobbed into the foundation of Oregon's healthcare system. And you're saying that, of course, this isn't for waste, fraud, or inefficiency that these cuts were made, but because the federal government just simply stopped paying its share for Medicaid, healthcare premium subsidies, and SNAP benefits, and then created a massive bureaucracy to scrutinize eligibility. This is essentially what the Democrats in Congress are saying in refusing to go along with the continuing budget resolution. So what do you think of their strategy? That has
The Democrat strategy in Washington, D.C.?
Yes.
Yeah, I think I think it was the right move. I think they need to continue to apply pressure. I feel like when you're in the minority, like like we are now in Washington, D.C., in all 3 branches, sometimes the only choice you have is to, well, obviously you vote no and the policy's bad, but you also have to find ways to make the majority party come to the table. I think shining a light on a bill that most people in the country are just now starting to understand about this bill, the cuts that were going to come, was absolutely the right move. I think it is applying the right amount of pressure. Now, will it work? I don't know. I mean, I hope so. I think that the Republicans are going to look bad coming out of this. As much as they're trying to hang this on the shoulders of Democrats, this is a bill that the Republicans passed. This is a bill that they're gaslighting the rest of America about. They're trying to say the Democrats don't care about healthcare when it's absolutely the opposite. And so I feel like the strategy is right. It's probably the only strategy we have right now until the midterms, when Americans will be able to go back to the polls and say, no, we don't want we don't want a Congress that's going to defund healthcare in the United States of America.
Peter, you've had your hand up. Go ahead. What's your question?
Yeah, thank you, Representative Javadi. You sponsored a bill with my representative, Tom Anderson, to require that all law enforcement in Oregon wear identification at all times when they're on duty and also be unmasked. What do you think is the future of that bill?
I think that the future is promising. We definitely have some work to do to make sure that we, California passed, I guess what I'm trying to go with is California passed a has a very similar law or rule in place right now. And we're hanging this bill on the peg of, when the federal agents come into the state of Oregon, they still have to follow state laws. They have to stop at red lights. They have to, obey any other law enforcement rules or laws or laws of the land that are in Oregon. We're just adding one more that says you can't wear face masks. You can't. I saw pictures today of ICE officers whose faces are completely covered with a mask. They're wearing sunglasses, hats. You have no idea who these people are. They're not hard to impersonate. And I think it's terrifying for citizens and people, regardless of their immigration status, to not know who is approaching them. And I don't think we should support the idea that the government can show up unidentified and take away our rights, violate our due process, and ignore the rule of law.
You think the law will pass?
I think that we're going to have law enforcement at the table with it, because local law enforcement and the rest of the Democratic Party acknowledges are not the problem. These are the federal ICE officers, but we want to make sure that whatever we pass has the has had law enforcement an opportunity to weigh in. I think that with that in mind, whatever we get across the finish line has a good chance of passing, because it's going to go to the ballot and it'll be up to Oregonians to vote and add that to the Constitution of Oregon. And if that passes, then if it gets, if the Constitution is amended, then that law will go into effect. So I think, yeah, it has a pretty good chance. I don't know. It's early and I'm hopeful, but we'll start to see how it gets challenged by different groups and what we have to do to tweak it.
Thank you.
Wanted to, if we have a few more minutes, to ask you a couple of questions about the environment. Your rating as a Republican, I will tell you, was not really high from the Oregon League of Conservation Voters. And so I had a couple of questions from we have a group called Climate, Energy, Environment here. You know Alan, and we met on the Climate, Energy, Infrastructure Hubs. But there is also an amendment to the Constitution that we have been promoting. The Oregon Coalition for Environmental Rights Amendment is seeking a ballot initiative that's scheduled for November 2028 to amend the Oregon Constitution to guarantee Oregonians the right to a healthy environment. And this is really about being able to hold state agencies responsible for actually implementing measures for clean water and air and the like. If that were to appear as a legislative referral bill, would you support it? And if not, why not?
Well, it's so good. I mean, I love the concept. Assuming that I haven't seen the language of it, but I nothing about it jumps out at me as having a problem with it. So I would plan to support it. The why is, I mean, I think that climate science is well documented and well proved, and I think that we have a responsibility to protect our forests, our water, and the air, so that we have clean air, clean water, and to balance that with economic and local needs and recreation and the rest of it, so that it can be a place that's sustainable. So I don't have any issues with the concept as you described it at this point. And I think anything that continues to support the efforts of clean environment, clean energy, etc., are worth looking into and supporting, as long as we can work out all the kinks.
Okay, thank you. I think that's all we have for tonight in this time frame. Maybe you'll come back as your.
Yes, happy to come back anytime and be on time, I promise.
Thank you.
Thank you for showing up. It was wonderful to meet you, and we're just delighted to have somebody who's so thoughtful on our side.
Well, happy to be here. You know, I know that trust is earned, and I know I've got a lot of learning still to do, and I want to hear from people and talk to them. I know there's a lot of, like I said, you know, my worldview and my experiences are one part of the pie, but I think hearing from everybody else and their lived experiences helps Oregon be a better place because we can make better policy when we're listening to each other and working with each other rather than, you know, crawling into our trenches and doubling down on ideologies based on the personality of somebody in the White House. So looking forward to spending more time in conversations just like these to sharpen my tools. So thank you.
Well, you're
Thank
welcome
you.
anytime. Come visit us.
Appreciate it.
All right.
All righty. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody,
Thank
for
you.
showing up
Thank you.
tonight and staying late with us. We hope that you enjoyed the conversations tonight and that you take them forward and tell other people about them in your groups. Invite them to come in 2 weeks. I think in 2 weeks, we're having a presentation by Bev Stein on a 1 Million Rising project that she's got going and some experiences that she has in 2 weeks. So you'll get information on that. This has also been recorded tonight, so we will be able, you can share it with your groups if you'd like to do that. So.